Welcome to I Am, I Have, How It Helps, brought to you by Happiful magazine and counselling directory. Today's return guest is the very wonderful GP, broadcaster and author, Dr Radha Modgil. We're going to be talking about harnessing your own power, but specifically in tough times when we're feeling like that's the last thing we might be able to do. Dr Radha is the perfect person to discuss this, and she's just released her brilliant new book, Know Your Own Power. We talk about the signs that we may be in a downward spiral, what happens when we realise our lives or circumstances may need to change, and managing grief when life throws the unexpected at us. Before we start today's episode, I'd love to encourage you to download the free Happiful app. You can read our digital magazine whenever and wherever you want to, and search for the perfect therapist, life coach, nutritionist or hypnotherapist for you. Back to Dr Radha. After you've listened, it would be great if you'd consider rating this podcast and leaving us a review. It helps others to find I Am, I Have, and for us to know what you'd like more of. I hope you enjoy this episode. We're going to be talking about harnessing your own power, but specifically at times when we're feeling like that's the last thing we're able to do. Dr. Radha is the perfect person to discuss this, as she's just released her beautiful, realistic and actionable book, Know Your Own Power. Welcome back, Radha.
Oh, it's so lovely to be here. Honestly, thank you so much for having me. It's always a delight. Thank you.
Would you mind, for people who haven't heard from you before, just introducing yourself and sharing a bit more about what you do on a daily basis?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Radha. I'm called Dr. Radha in my media work and broadcasting work, but definitely Radha under R on a phone contact list, not D. And I'm a GP. I'm a medical doctor, but I also got into broadcasting and media work about 13 years ago now, actually. A little bit by mistake through my sister seeing an advert and just starting to do some TV and radio. And then I slowly developed a real interest and passion. I've always had that, but a real interest in focusing on emotional well-being, mental health, and basically all things life, and kind of really got interested in how we get through life, what we can do to help each other, what we can learn and what we can share. And basically I obviously am still a doctor, medical doctor, but I also do lots of broadcasting, writing and TV work, and mainly around life and how do we do life? You know, this is like a never-ending question. I'm not sure I'll find all the answers, but I definitely put all my efforts into trying to find them, and I meet some incredible people along the way, and I learn such a lot myself as well.
And you share that learning with us through all the work you do. You write for a lot of different publications, including The Independent. You appear on podcasts, you have podcasts, and now you have this amazing book, Know Your Own Power, which is just a beautiful bundle of the advice that you need when times are tough through to when you're trying to move forward. Can you just share a bit about what really inspired you to write this book? Because it is packed full of really realistic information. You know, self-help books get a bad rap sometimes for being a bit toxic in terms of let's just be positive, but this book is realistic, actionable, and really hits where it needs to in terms of how you can help yourself. What was your inspiration?
Oh, well, firstly, thank you, because that means the world to me, because that's what I tried to set out to do. I think this book has been in me for a very, very long time. I think it's been building over all the years of not just my broadcasting work and talking to people about their mental health as a doctor, but also a broadcaster, but actually also in my own life, because, you know, I'm not just a doctor and do media work, I'm a human. And, you know, I've been through different things in my life, difficult times in my life. And all of that kind of was there in me. And I've been approached by quite a few different publishers about writing a book, but I wanted to wait and I wanted to hold off until there was a really special book, a book that was a bit unusual, a bit different. I didn't want to be boxed in as a sort of medical doctor, and because I've done a lot of that sort of stuff together. So I got approached, well, the pandemic hit. Basically, I then started to share more social media posts, more advice, more tips, more of myself, I think. I started to learn to be a bit more vulnerable, I think, on social media, because we were all going through such a difficult time, myself included. And I just remember putting out a post about morning anxiety, because I was having it myself at the time back in April 2020. And the response I got was just extraordinary. And I started to think, okay, well, maybe I can help people, maybe this is helpful, maybe my advice is useful. Then basically I then got contacted by the publishers who said, have you thought about writing a book? And I was like, yes, this is my idea. And I went to and fro, and then they said, yes, write it. And that's really how it was born. So a lot of it was inspired by, what I've been through, but also the way I wrote it was actually sitting down and transporting myself back into a time when I had literally had everything fall apart. And I sat there and I thought, okay, how did I feel? What was going on for me at that time? What helped me? And what actually brought me through that? And that's really how I wrote this book.
And the wonderful thing about it is it's know your own power. You talk about your own experience in terms of maybe times when you really had to tap into, what can keep me well during this crisis point. So we're going to really focus on the first part of the book, which is about toughest times, because it's something we don't talk about as often as we should perhaps on this podcast, which is when you're in the midst of a crisis. And you start by talking about warning signs. I found this so interesting because reading through your warning signs, I could just take myself back to times when that was happening. And if I'd have read this, I wonder whether I would have caught myself beforehand. But can you share what some warning signs might be when we're entering into that phase of either crises or perhaps our life starting to change?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like I say, some crises come out of nowhere and we don't have any power of that. But there are quite a lot actually, when we look back and we say, actually, do you know what? I kind of knew that. I kind of got an inkling, but I didn't really listen, didn't really pay attention, didn't really spend the time to kind of be aware of it. So some of those warning signs might be feeling generally a bit lost, feeling directionless, making excuses for yourself to other people about how your life looks like, or trying to justify what you're doing, trying to pretend you're happy to people is a big one. And also, I think kind of just feeling really like there are recurrent patterns going on in your life. So, for example, with relationships, recurrent arguments, same triggers, same issues, no kind of progress, no movement forward, for example. But I think also molding yourself into somebody else, losing yourself in either another person, in a relationship or a friendship or a family dynamic, or losing yourself in work, losing yourself in anything. When we don't have balance is the hardest thing to achieve, I know, but when we don't have balance, that's a real kind of red flag, I think. I think also though, that feeling you get in your stomach where you just think, if someone asks you, how are you? What is your first response? What's that kind of split second response in terms of what you want to say, as opposed to that kind of artificial response that you give after you've had a little bit of time to think and actually project or kind of write the story you want to write, and tell them that. So there are a few of the warning signs that might be there.
That's so interesting. And also that period between what comes out your mouth and how you really feel. And later on in the book, you talk about intuition, and that kind of gut feeling, and also pushing that gut feeling away, when something's off, but you're excusing it. What can we do when we see these warning signs, and how can we harness our power when we're trying to edge away from those feelings?
Great question. I think slowing down is really important, because slowing down allows us to have that space for that awareness and that noticing and that realization to occur. When we get busy, when we kind of go into automatic pilot, when we just carry on with our heads down, not looking up around us, it's very difficult to realize. And I write a chapter about realizing, because that realizing is such an important step of letting things hit you and really being like, okay, do you know what? I now have to take notice of this. So making space, making time, slowing down, having time away from different situations, having time with people who know you really well or who've known you in the past, as to how you were or once perhaps was before you got a bit lost. Really important. Having a sounding board, and actually being vulnerable to those people you feel comfortable to be vulnerable in front of. I think also things like music and films. I often find that when I'm going through a difficult time, I'll be drawn to a particular film or a particular lyric in a song, and I think, what's that about? What's that trying to tell me? Why am I kind of hanging on to that? There's something in there, something about a theme or perhaps a character story in that film that really resonates with me. I think also it's about addressing fear, because at the end of the day, a lot of the time we know this, there's something in our system which tells us this is not right, but because we're frightened of what that means, we then push it away and we go into denial, and we basically just say, I don't want to hear, I don't want to see this. I'm just going to carry on and ignore this because I want what I want. And if it's not going to happen, oh my gosh, what on earth is going to happen to me then? And what does that mean for my life? So fear is a strong driver, I think, of denial, and it's a strong driver of ignoring those warning signs. And I think with fear, really important to recognize that, to say, okay, I can feel that, but to try and get specific about it. So what specifically are you frightened about? If this situation didn't work out, what does that mean for you? What are you scared of specifically? Really drill down into the detail, and then say to yourself, okay, well, if that did happen, could I cope? Could I not cope? What would that look like? What would that be like? Is it actually as bad as I think it might be? And then stepping back and saying, you know, that's frightening, but how frightening is it to sort of sit in denial, and how painful is it to sort of suffer with these kind of warning signs and knowing something's not right? Because at the end of the day, we really make a decision, it's painful to sit in something, but it's perhaps more painful to actually not address it and not to sort it out. So which is worse? And I think sometimes after a period of time, that balance will tip, and you'll start to realize actually it's more painful to sit with the familiar than it is scary to step into the unfamiliar.
I think most people listening to this will have had at least one example of that come to mind when you were talking about it. And you said keeping your head down, that kind of just moving forward, keeping busy. You talk about busy is not a badge of honor. It's not your USP. Quite often we can mask what we're going through by being busy and constantly being plugged in. So perhaps you're always walking with a podcast and, you're filling your head all the time so that you're not thinking about that. You talk about writing things down in the book, which I think can be really great for actually getting it out onto paper and seeing it in black and white. I have a friend who doesn't do writing, she says, but what she'll do is she'll do a voice note for herself and then listen back to it, because that way she can articulate what's going on and try to make sense of it. So I think there are lots of things we can do, but fundamentally your suggestion of slowing down is what we need to do. Slow down, think, and really interrogate that fear. And talking about fear, you said about the chapter on realizing what's going on. That can be terrifying when you realize, it can feel like a sucker punch sometimes, that kind of cold fear, but it's part of the process, isn't it? Can you talk us through your perspective on realizing and how to harness your power in those times?
Absolutely, yeah. And I just want to say I love your idea, your friend's strategy of doing a voice note, because I also think that hearing your own voice saying something back to you is really powerful, much more so than other people. But yeah, realizing is that kind of it's that second step after kind of recognizing the warning signs. And you're right, it can be absolutely devastating when you've had this suspicion for a while that something's not right. You try to deny it, you try to just carry on, and then suddenly something happens either in your consciousness or perhaps an external event where you think, oh my God, I now cannot pretend anymore. I now have to face up to reality. I now have to, work through this. And oh my gosh, what does that mean? What is that going to mean for my life? And it's terrifying and it's devastating. And on the other hand, it's also a real gift, because I think when you see something and when you realize something, to that degree, it's very difficult to go back into denial. So that realizing really is the start of your journey forward and forward into change. So it is a gift, but it's a terrifying gift. But if you don't accept the gift, you're just going to stay stuck in that pattern of pain. So really, it's an open door to freedom. It's an open door to actually saying, do you know what? You've been in pain. You've been going through distress because something's not right. This is really painful, and it can feel even worse than, the warning signs. But actually, if you accept it, there's another way. There's something that can get better. And I think it's about that hope, and it's about accepting that gift for that. So that realizing has to happen, because without that, nothing can then change and move forward. But it's about breathing, being kind to yourself with that realizing. It's about asking for support from people who know you really well and who are kind to you. And it's about recognizing that, yes, this is going to be the start of a long journey, and it's going to be quite exhausting. So actually, how can I refill emotionally, and how can I look after myself mentally, because I've got a long journey ahead. And that can feel quite depressing and a bit like, oh God, no, thank you, I don't anymore. But it kind of has to happen, I think, once we realise. I don't think our systems actually let us go back. They don't let us go backwards. They just want us to go forwards after we reach that stage.
Exactly. And like you said, you will have a long journey and that feels depressing, but or could feel depressing, but it is part
Mm.
of life, isn't it? It's we will all have a time where we have crises, we have a realization. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about a relationship in my 20s that finished, and at the time it felt devastating. I moved house, I moved to London on my own. I felt very lonely at the time. If you'd have said this is a gift, I think I would have said, really,
Yes, yes.
this
It'd be
feels
like, can you leave, please? I don't want to hear any more from you.
this feels like the biggest heartache I've ever experienced. But looking back now, I can see that we weren't right for each other. And actually, we are much happier in the lives that we have gone forward with. And actually, we were both really stuck at that time. But, there is that center of kind of fear, but you will move out of that. And it's so hard, isn't it, when people tell you at the time, because you can't hear it, but it is a universal truth that you will move beyond that moment.
You will definitely, and that's why I wanted to write this book actually, because I wanted to write it as a process, as a journey, which it very much is. And no one can say to you at any point, "Oh, skip a few chapters and you'll be moving forward tomorrow." You just can't do it. And we all want to take away that pain and that challenge and that learning about ourselves, because it is painful, it is hard, it's difficult. We want to fast forward, but I wanted to take the reader through that journey to say, do you know what? It's okay. It is a journey, and that's okay that it's a journey, and it's okay that it might take time, and it's okay that you might have to pause on that particular stage or chapter for a bit longer, because in the end, you will get there. And, I think in our culture, there's such a lot of pressure to move forward really fast and get on with it. Pick yourself up, get on with it, move forward. And I'm all in favour of moving forward and getting up and starting again. But I write in this book, I feel really strongly about those sort of magazines or articles that just tell you, just, all right, the relationship's over, get up, sort yourself out and move on. No, we need to have time to process, to understand what's happened, to understand ourselves, because if we don't, we're going to make poor decisions. We're going to end up making choices that just basically end up causing those kind of patterns to recur and those themes to happen again in our lives. So if we're going to have to go through something hard, I'm quite stubborn. I'm like, if I have to go through something really difficult, I want to learn something from it, and I want to get something out of it. A bit like exercise. I'm like, all right, this is a hard set of squats, but I'm gonna feel better for it. I'm gonna get fitter. So I just think if we have to go through difficult things in life, let's at least learn something about ourselves so we can, live a happier life in the future, and also understand ourselves better, and therefore help other people around us as well.
I agree. And it's loss, isn't it? This was something that really stood out in your book for me. It can be loss of something we never had. So it can be loss of the future we imagined with somebody, or loss of an opportunity, or loss of, this image that we built in our head for how life was going to be. And you need to grieve for that, perhaps, and let it go.
Absolutely, you're so right. And when we talk about grief, obviously we think about people that we love, quite rightly. We think about all of those kind of things, but grief comes in many different forms, and loss comes in many different forms. And like you say, we have our own ideas about how our lives should be and how we want them to be and how we're trying to force them to be. And at the end of the day, we can't control that. The only thing we can control is ourselves and how we react to things that happen to us. And actually, who are we sometimes to know actually what is the best thing for us? Plenty of times in my life I've thought, oh, this is definitely the best thing for me. Something's gone wrong. And then I've looked back and thought, oh my gosh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that life knew better than I did. And I think, a lot of anxiety, I think, comes from us feeling like we have to control our lives and we're the only people in control. We are of our thoughts and feelings and actions and choices once we understand ourselves. But actually, I find it quite reassuring that there's also a thing called life that does get in the way and does input, and actually that we can kind of work with and learn from. Because some of the hardest things in my life have been the things that I've learnt the most about myself from. And without those experiences, I wouldn't have been able to write this book. Every single word in this book comes from something that I've been through that's been difficult. And so, actually, yes, we don't want to feel it. And yes, it's annoying. And yes, wouldn't it be lovely if we had it our own way? But actually, there's a lot of richness in not having it our own way and being open to different possibilities that often are better than the things we actually thought would be the best thing.
I mean, that's a beautiful perspective. And, it's absolutely right. We can't control everything. We can't filter everything, as is on social media. We are impacted by life as well as living life. And that is why I just think your book is so beautiful. Many of our listeners will have experienced at least one moment in their life when it feels like their world has imploded. Can you share your thinking on finding your power at this time, and how to access it when you feel like, there's been such a shift in your life? Because perhaps that's the time when you feel the least powerful.
Yes, definitely. And I think powerlessness or the feeling of powerlessness is probably one of the worst feelings ever. I definitely think it's one of the worst feelings for me. Because I'm someone who's like, right, come on, let's get on with it. What can we do? What can we
Let's make this
change?
better. Yeah.
Let's make this better. And I've had to learn that actually part of my power is to accept things, and part of my power is to not fix things. And so, actually, when I say power, we associate power with, authority or action or being strong in inverted commas. The way my definition of power in this book is not that at all. It's actually a collection of different strategies, different tools, different emotional stages, different understandings about who you are. So it's not. This is not about getting up and being strong, whatever that means, and carrying on. This is about working with you. And I want people to know from this book that no matter what has happened, they have something inside themselves already that they can use. It's not outside themselves, it's in them, but it's just that they've forgotten about it. They haven't used it. They perhaps don't understand how to tap into it. And there are certain things that, that power could be, you know, sitting down and crying for a day. It could be asking someone for help. It could be having a bath. It could be, on the other hand, it could be getting up and writing a list of things you need to do and, trying to change a habit. And, there are so many different ways that we can show and use our power. But it's all about picking the right tool for the right moment and the right emotional stage that you're in. So, in terms of someone finding their own power, I think it's really important to recognize that even small things that you do can change things in a big way. So I use the example of a relationship dynamic or a family dynamic, for example. Those times when we go, especially maybe over Christmas and things, when you you go out for those kind of, family lunches or dinners or whatever it might be, and there's someone there and you just think, oh my gosh, this dynamic, the same old dynamic is going to happen. We're going to argue. They're going to trigger me. It's all going to end in disaster. They're not going to change, but you can. You can change by understanding what your triggers are, why you get triggered by them, what's the unmet need in you that you're looking to them to fulfill, but they're not, and your emotional reaction to that. And if you can understand that and try to work on that, then when you meet that person, you're right, they're not going to change, but what you bring to that relationship and that lunch will be different. Now, by definition, any interaction is two-way. So if you're changing what one thing you're bringing, by automatic default, something else is going to have to change from their point of view. Not necessarily in the way you want it to, but something will have to change. So I think that's a very tiny example of how even when things feel like they're unchangeable and rigid and you can't do anything about it, there is always something, if you step back and think about it and reflect, that you can change because you bring energy to any situation, and your choices, your small actions, whether or not, like I say, that's kindness or hope or purpose or the more tangible, practical things, you can change something. And if you keep changing and keep making those good choices for yourselves, then actually long term, your life will look different and you will get there in the end.
It's so powerful, your example, to come to a situation that perhaps you would have catastrophized before and really felt like that was going to be something detrimental, and you have no power but to go and experience that, to actually do that work beforehand and go in knowing that you have the tools, you have the backup, or, you know, within yourself, to not let that play out for you as it might have done before. You know, it's such an interesting one. And it reminded me of an example I saw over Christmas about families who talk about food and diet a lot, and weight, and just simply saying very kindly, I'd rather not talk about that. You know, and it was just, I had never thought about giving yourself permission to say, that's not a conversation I want to have. You know, it's so simple. You can do it kindly. You take back the power in something that perhaps would have really, really bugged you and you'd have gone away and thought about. I mean, that's a tiny example, but I can see from everything you've written, you know, this does apply to some of the biggest crises in life. You know, just tapping into what you need at that time and the small things you can do.
Definitely. And I actually think also the way we start to feel more powerful in our own lives is to approach life in a less scared way.
Mm.
And once we start to make those small choices, like the ones we've just talked about, and we start to understand that actually that can change things, and we then start to trust ourselves that actually we can do something about anything. And once we start to build that trust in ourselves, we can then slowly approach life in a way where we don't feel so overwhelmed, we don't feel so scared, and we don't feel so frightened of being of the fact that we can't cope. So the more we start to use our power, the more we start to realize we can change even tiny things, the more we can get that sense of, okay, maybe I can do this, maybe I can be okay in life. And then once we have that trust, we can approach life in that kind of open way, that more friendly way, that less constricted and less defensive way, and that less controlling way. And then actually we can embrace all of the gifts that life brings us, and all the opportunities that life actually presents us with as well. So my real desire for this book is for people to understand that if they focus on that trusting relationship with themselves, that actually life can be less scary, and then actually life can be really lovely as well at the same time, despite what's going on.
I love talking to you. We've talked about some of the darkest times in life, and yet I feel really positive about this conversation, and also about the fact that we all have that power, and that power isn't like a bouncing back, a super person. You know, it's a quiet knowing, trusting yourself, getting to know what you need and acting upon it, and, you know, using that agency you have in life to make life work a bit better for you in the toughest times and beyond. So is there anything else you'd like to say before we end the podcast about the book, or just, you know, knowing your own power generally?
I think I would just like to say to everybody that the last 2.5 years has been absolutely the most challenging time for so many of us. And I think there's never been a time when people, I think, have felt more powerless than the last couple of years. But I really, honestly, my true heart's desire that everyone feels that they do have something, that they can change something, that actually things can be better, and they're not stuck. And I just don't want anyone to feel alone or to feel like they can't change something. That's really what I want everyone to feel and to experience. And I hope that my book goes a small way to doing that.
Thank you so much for coming on again. Can you tell people where they can find you online? And also, the book is called Know Your Own Power. It's available now, and people can find you.
Yes, they can find me on Twitter. So I'm at Dr Radha Modgil, and on Instagram at Dr_Radha as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you
And
for having
I
me
hope
on.
we can do this again soon.
Oh, I would love to. Honestly, thank you so much. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you for listening to I Am, I Have. Don't forget to check out the counselling directory or download the free Happiful app. And again, we'd really love it if you could rate, review and subscribe to our podcast too. Before you go, I just wanted to let you know that on the Happiful app we have information about where you can find mental health support. And if you need immediate help, Samaritans are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on 116 123, or you can email joe@samaritans.org. help is available. This podcast is hosted and produced by me, Lucy Donahue for Happiful. I hope you'll listen again soon.